Hello, Miss Bartello. Finally, our last
Disclaimer,
seminar.
quick
Uh,
disclaimer, you're gonna have to look at my roof today. It's just not, I'm not suitable to be looked at, but I'm here, I promise you.
lovely
Alright,
hand. All right, shall we just dive right into the question?
the last question of the semester.
The question asks what your opinion basically is on what Victor said about basically like Victor warning Robert that acquiring knowledge can lead to destruction and infallible misery. So, personally, I think that destruction is only inevitable depending on what you do with said knowledge. Victor treated the knowledge that he obtained throughout the book in a negative manner. He was really obsessive with it. He pursued it in an unhealthy manner, and he created something that defied nature that should have never existed. Of course, that's going to create an outlash backwards, but if I personally think that Victor never really did anything, that if he just simply had that knowledge and he just didn't do a darn thing about it, life probably would have just continued the way it was before with him.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also agree with like what you said, how, I don't know, I feel like it could be both true and false. Like, I remember talking about this in one of our seminars before, how it all depends on the type of person that you aspire to be and how one like puts forth their knowledge. So like for example, if you want to use your knowledge to like spread good throughout society, then that person should like be able to, like that's spiritually. But if they want to use it for the opposite, then unfortunately, although that's not like good for anybody, that's how they can use it as well. And sometimes I feel like one's intentions with their knowledge can be like tampered with by just like by fate and everything. So I feel like Victor's actually a good example of that, like how he wanted to show people that he was able to create like great things, like the monster, and that he was so like worried about what the public thought of him that he completely overlooked like the potential consequences, and which kind of leads to the fact like how one's ambition can actually cost another person like their life.
Well, I wanna bring 2 points up about what you said, Courtney, about how if one's intention with the knowledge that they have is good, then it should lead to good endings. Victor had good intentions about like the monster he was creating. He thought he was going to create like a better like species, and it was just going to be better than humans. And it turned out to have bad consequences. So I don't necessarily, I see where you're coming from, but I don't necessarily agree with it, I guess. And another point I wanted to bring up is how you said others' knowledge leading to another's destruction, kind of misery. I agree with that. One of my examples for that is Elizabeth. She never had like a formal education like Victor had, and she never learned about what Victor had done or what Victor was doing. This kind of kept her uneducated, and she didn't have any knowledge, but she still had a destruction at the end of the story, her death. So I do agree with you with your point saying how even though you may not have knowledge, it could still lead to your destruction depending on who else has the knowledge.
Yeah, that can actually be used in real life for so many consequences, so many different things. Like I just thought of like one example of real life, World War II, the nuclear bomb. We had like like America, we had the knowledge to create it, but it was because we used that knowledge and bombed a lot of Japanese people.
Yeah,
A weird connection I just made, but it just the idea of somebody's knowledge causing the destruction of somebody else is just it made a connection like that.
So
yeah.
I also, oh, go ahead. You can
Well,
speak.
just like a quick point I wanted to bring up. I guess it doesn't have to be like I see where you're coming from, like on a bigger scale. It doesn't even have to be that big. It could be like
Yeah.
regular like high school problems. Like, oh, like this girl knows that blah 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 did this to like cheated on his like girlfriend, and like it's just like this whole like what others' knowledge can do to other people. Like it doesn't have to be like so like worldwide, I guess.
Yeah.
I was actually gonna make a connection with like this idea to the book,
Hmm.
like with Justine's trial actually, like how Victor knew that Justine was innocent, but yet he still continued to stay silent. So his knowledge, him confining that knowledge, led to Justine's death. So I felt like that could be an example.
Oh, this can kind of tie into the whole irony that him and Justine were put in a very similar situation, being blamed for murder. And like you said, Victor had knowledge to help Justine, but he didn't speak up and he wasn't there for family and a close person in a time of need, unlike his father that was there for Victor when Victor needed help. And Victor was able to get that help and he was not executed for murder. And it kind of ties into the theme of family connection. And this also the idea of that is when people close to Victor started dying, that's kind of when he started to truly realize how what he really has taken for granted. Because it was during those times basically that he really needed to he wanted to be towards his family because everybody around him was dying.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. What I thought was interesting when Victor was charged for murder was how his father helped him through that. But like you said, he didn't help Justine through that.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of like showed Victor's character in a way. I thought it showed how like cowardice he was and
Yeah.
how strong like his father was and how strong everyone else around him was.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of just like highlighted how much of a coward he was.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Do you think that was the name was Shelley? Yes, who created the book.
No?
Shelley.
Yeah.
Like that's the last name. Yeah. Do you think that she did this on purpose to kind of like highlight that feature of or like personality trait of Victor, or was it just like quote unquote coincidence?
No, I think she definitely did that on purpose because I thought it was kind of ironic how he got charged for murder. And just thinking back to like Justine's charge, I thought it was too like on the nose to be a coincidence or anything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The situation was kind of lined up to be very similar.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that Justine got more of a harsher charge because of the fact that she's female? Like I don't know if that's a stretch or not, but that's just like a question about.
I think according to that situation, I don't really think gender really played that much of a big role. Like, gender plays a big role throughout the book, and throughout the book, you can see the passiveness of the woman compared to the man. But I don't think that in that particular situation, gender really played a big deal. I think that was just more of the idea of how big of a deal isolation versus connections with family. I think that kind of ties more into that theme rather than the theme of gender.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Another point I wanted to bring up for Miss Bartello's question was kind of like the monster's knowledge a little bit, just to like kind of like steer away from Victor for a second. How the monster's knowledge about humanity and its faults, its prejudices, it led him to be a very miserable and hateful monster. This like miserableness and like hatred led to him killing William and then framing Justine and then killing Henry and then killing Elizabeth. I think like all that, like just the monster's like story kind of proves what he was telling Walter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I find it pretty like ironic how the monster was actually forcing all its attacks on like Victor's closest family and like friends. And it's like almost as if this is just his way of like vengeance and it's like forcing Victor's isolation, just how like the monster was basically formed. And it shows like it brings us back to that point that how the monster's knowledge of like people's emotions, I guess you could say, and like his knowledge of who Victor was close to, who he kept like closer to his heart, is like his way of what am I trying to say? Like he knew what path he needed to take to really hurt Victor. Because if he wasn't as smart as people thought he was, you know, that he would have just killed Victor on the spot. And would have just let him take the easy way out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I actually I thought about like the fact that like the monster kind of tried to give Victor the punishment that the monster has tried to basically the punishment that the monster has been given just based by living. Because the monster hasn't been given the chance and he's been deprived of the idea of having a family and a form of connection. Honestly, the monster killing off Victor's family, it reminded me of Hammurabi's code with eye for an eye. And I was wondering if it was supposed to be like a Bible connection or maybe that was just me making that connection. But it was basically an eye for an eye. The monster's isolation and no family. So why doesn't Victor give Victor isolation and no family? So then Victor can understand the pain and agony that the monster has gone through.
Well, I definitely saw like a religious reference when the monster was talking to Walton at the end, and he was talking about how he was a fallen angel. And he said he was a fallen angel. I automatically like not assumed, but like I made the connection like him and Satan. Like Satan was the fallen angel.
Yeah.
And how Satan kind of like wants to make people turn away from God. And Victor being like a godlike figure for creating like the monster, him trying to like take away his family, like Satan was trying to take away God's followers. I definitely saw a connection there.
That's interesting. And, like him killing off the family is kind of like how Satan recruited angels to come over to his side. So it's kind of like him taking off numbers off of Victor's side, like killing off angels in that sense. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really.
Do we want to continue on this topic or do we want to go somewhere else?
No, I think we can go somewhere else. I'm all good.
Yeah. All right. So I want to bring up. I want to go a little bit more into the connection between Victor and the monster. I think, in a sense, the Victor, in the sense, is kind of the real monster here. He created this being, and he immediately deprived that being of happiness and a family. He called this being evil, yet near the end, he called this being evil for killing his family and whatnot, but he was driven to that point of insanity. But in the end, you see how hypocritical that is, because Victor is driven to that exact same point, and he swore revenge against the monster himself. And he was rather selfish throughout it and didn't really care about like the monster's opinion most of the time. And he was basically, and his thirst for revenge became basically as strong as the monster's. So in the sense, Victor kind of inevitably became the real monster.
Well, I mean, I don't know how I feel about that because I really feel this is gonna be weird, but I feel like Victor doesn't really have. I don't know. I don't want to say that he doesn't have the right to be angry because if you think about it, throughout this entire novel, like every time he felt some type of way or if he was stressed out about something, he would isolate himself from family and friends. So it's just like, I know this is gonna sound bad, but shouldn't he be used to it by now? Like, I don't know. He kind of like put himself in that position where he doesn't even acknowledge his family and friends anymore. And now that he has that taken away, it's almost as if he's like regretting it. Like, dang, I really messed up this time. But it's like he wants to take out his anger on other people when in reality he kind of put himself in that scenario. I don't know if that's a stretch or not. But
I can definitely see that. But the way like I took it was like since he came from like a pretty good childhood, I just thought it was kind of like learned helplessness. Because whenever he like turned to isolation, there was always someone who like brought him out, whether it was Henry or his father or Elizabeth. And I think just the killing of like Henry and Elizabeth I think that kind of made him realize that there would be no one else to bring him out of isolation. And that before, when he kind of did put him in isolation, it wasn't really isolation. It was just him trying to like get others to help him. I think now that he realized that Elizabeth, Henry, Justine, and William are dead, that like no one else can help him, that he's truly isolated now.
Mm-hmm.
That really shows how dependent he actually was like on other people.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, since he isolated himself so much.
Right, trying to be independent, that he in reality was actually just very dependent on others. Like he used that as an escape mechanism.
Do you think that he was justified to swear revenge against the monster? Like his.
Can go.
No, I was just like elaborating on my question, but you were already answering it, so continue.
It's just like, I don't know, something about that just irked me.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't think that he really. Wait, can you repeat your question? I'm sorry, I lost my thought.
Well, I'll say mine while you think of yours. But I definitely thought it was a really ironic situation, and it was kind of hard to determine because he did create this monster and then isolate him. It's kind of like adopting a dog and then isolating it.
Yeah.
Like that's a horrible thing to do. But then again, the monster did kill like most of his family and his wife. So it's kind of, I guess, like what you think personally. Like if you create your own destruction, then it's your fault. But if you are destroyed by something else and you don't think it's your fault, I think it just kind of depends on your like own personal opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mine is that he did it. Like he created his own destruction through like his knowledge of nature and then his ambition of trying to recreate nature and it just ending badly for him.
Yeah, it's kind of like we're trying to do reference. It's kind of as if, like, say if you choose not to study for a test and you decide to cheat off of someone and you still fail and you blame that person and you're just like, oh, I'm gonna get you for that. Like, you're the reason why I failed. Well, it's like, no.
You could have studied in the first place, like,
exactly. Like you kind of put yourself in that situation. You can't blame others for mistakes that you made, and like you digging yourself deeper into a hole that you could have like gotten yourself out of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. When he was swearing revenge against the monster, it's almost kind of like him swearing of revenge up against himself. Like throughout the whole novel, where we continuously compare Victor with the monster and are continuously seeing the similarities between the two. So now that I think about it, we see the two really similar throughout the whole book. The monster from the beginning has been isolated and swore revenge against humanity due to his anger without having any connections to family. Do you think that it was inevitable for the Victor try to get revenge on his monster if he were to lose his family based on the fact that Victor and the monster are so alike?
Wait, can you like reword that?
All right. I'm sorry that it sounded really confusing. So throughout the whole book, we continuously compare Victor to the monster, and we're always seeing how very similar they are.
Okay.
So the monster has never had the chance to feel any compassion, and anytime he tried to reach out to compassion, he was basically slapped back in the face, and it drove him to the point of insanity. And him being driven to the point in insanity made him go on a revenge streak. Mm-hmm. So since he's so similar to Victor, it almost seems like it's a foreshadow of what Victor would do if Victor were to be brought to a point of insanity.
Well, I kind of like assumed that Justine and William's death was Victor's point of insanity. He didn't really go insane, but I felt like that was the point. That was at the point of his life when he realized that this monster was going to continue to do horrible things to him because he created the monster and then isolated it. I think he knew it. I just think he was too much of a coward to do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
I could definitely see how him like kind of like doing that would be ironic.
Mm-hmm.
But I just like I figured how like at that point in time of the book that's when he realized it.
Yeah. All right, I think that topic is a little. I think we've concluded that one a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm gonna go into point of view a bit. So throughout this whole book, it's not necessarily in the same person's point of view.
Mhm.
We start in Walton's, we go to Victor's, we go to the monsters a little bit, and then we go back to the Waltons, and then we go to monsters a little bit again. So it's really important, and obviously Shelley did it for a reason, that the book is split up into different perspectives. And I think that it's split up this way so you can evaluate a little bit better and see for yourself Victor and the monster, essentially. For example, in the beginning, you see Victor through Walton's eyes, and Walton looks up to Victor as a noble. So then you kind of become more fascinated with Victor's story and why is he brought to this point of agony and basically dying in Walton's arms.
Mhm.
And then throughout Victor's story, Victor portrays himself basically as a victim of his own actions. He's not necessarily taking responsibility for everything because more or less he's blaming it on the monster. He takes responsibility for it a little bit in saying basically like too much knowledge isn't a good thing and he doesn't reveal the secret of creating a new life. But more or less, he blames it on the monster, and the monster is really depicted as an ugly and disgusting being. So then it might create the reader to start hating on the monster. But once you get to the section where the monster starts speaking, you start to see it in an entirely different light. You see the monster's pain that he has had to suffer through, the abandonment and the loneliness that he's had to suffer through. And you start to see Victor in the light of being reckless and extremely self-centered. So basically you're able to see throughout all these different perspectives what Victor is really like, and you're able to form your own opinion of what you think of Victor. And you're also able to form your own opinion of what you think of the monster. And it's not just one-sided.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the author did that on purpose, kind of like to give the reader or the audience like a sense of, or a feeling of confliction, which can kind of relate to each of the characters in the sense of what she can say.
Yeah, I definitely think she did that on purpose. Kind of like how in like, do you guys remember the Time of Butterflies book?
Yeah, and it was like through all the four sisters.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and it was like different point of views, so you could kind of like understand why each sister did what they did instead of just like one sister saying what she thinks about what the sister did and not really knowing the reason why. I think Shelley did the same thing so that we could understand the monster's motives and then we could understand Victor's motives and come to a conclusion of our own. I think she definitely pushed for the conclusion that it was kind of Victor's own destruction, Victor's own fault for his destruction, because she made the monster kind of like very like lonely and he was isolated, and it made the reader feel very sympathetic for him, and then kind of like made the reader connect to him in a way, because we've all felt like lonely at one point, and just like that want for like a human connection, and him being rejected from that, it was kind of like his escalation to do what he did. So I definitely think that it was to show different point of views, but it was trying to make us understand that Victor was kind of the real villain in the story.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to talk about Victor and the monster's relationship?
I don't have that much. No. Do you have anything? I mean, I have a few symbols. That's what I got.
I just kind of thought like the end of the book between Victor swearing vengeance on the monster and the monster kind of swearing vengeance on him earlier in the book just kind of like strengthened or like further supported like our conclusions, how Victor and the monster were kind of like related, kind of like foil characters to each other. Like, well, not really foil characters, they were
double like reflections.
Yeah, like reflective characters. They kind of like had the same motives, the same like goals for each other, like to destroy each other, but kind of have different motives for it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what were the symbols?
Wait, Courtney, what did you say?
I said I was gonna ask if you wanted to use like your symbols to like wrap it up because we're at like 5 minutes or 4.
All right. So you remember how in the chapter, like in the earlier chapters, that Victor ended up basically feeling extremely ill because of the fact that Henry died? So I saw Victor's sickness basically as a symbol of his guilt. So he always felt really ill when negative feelings such as guilt arose in him throughout the book. And for example, like after he created the monster, he felt kind of guilty for creating the monster and he was ill after creating it for a while. And him creating the monster is basically an indirect cause for the destruction of his family. Because of him creating the monster and mistreating the monster swore revenge and killed the family. So Victor felt really guilty, felt extremely guilty about killing the monster because of that. Thus why his sickness is tied in with his guilt, and thus why it's a symbol of his guilt because it caused him to be ill.
I kind of understand, but at the same time, it's only a little bit slowly.
Do I need to explain it a little bit more? Is like there a part you don't understand, or
like it's like I do, like I get where you're coming from, but it's just like I said, it's like a little bit foggy. I don't think you have to explain it out.
I definitely agree with like the symbol that you said. But I also had like 2 other symbols that I kind of want to bring up too. I definitely thought Henry's death in the book was a turning point for Victor. And like his death kind of symboled Victor's emotional death. But then when Victor married Elizabeth, it kind of symbolized his rebirth into a wiser life. I felt like that was his turning point where he realized how his ambition destroyed his life. And all that kind of led up to him meeting Walton and then kind of warning him. And I felt like that portion of his life was like a pretty wise portion of his life. And it all started when he married Elizabeth.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying from that.
I could definitely understand how Victor's illness, like how you saw Victor's illness was caused by his like guilt for kind of like indirectly killing everyone. I thought when you said that, it kind of reminded me of Romanticism and how they were really involved in nature and like disease. It's always like natural, like it's in nature. There are diseases everywhere.
Yeah,
and like during the end of the book, I kind of saw Romanticism kind of take a darker turn. Like you said, Victor was getting like ill. I could definitely see how like nature was no longer calming him anymore.
I was actually gonna bring that up a little bit. I was actually gonna get into that. You're bringing me into my next point. Nature, as you said, Emily, nature is no longer a calming presence to him. Romanticism always loves their nature, and he was such a romantic when it came to nature. But now nature kind of reminds him of how he tampered with it. So that's why I think that the Arctic wasteland was such a suiting place for both Victor and the monster to die. I'd say for Victor because he used to love nature, but this love for nature has now been replaced with this cold, barren feeling. Like his love for nature has been replaced with this cold and barren feeling in his heart, just like the Arctic wasteland was cold and barren. So I feel like that's especially why it was a suited place for him to die, because that's basically the mindset that he had about nature on his deathbed. because
I
didn't
never
think
like
about
thought
it.
of it that way. That's really good.
Yeah.
yeah, like you could see like and the yeah, I'm sorry, I just like lost it for a split second.
That's fine. I could definitely like see like Walton going up to the Arctic kind of foreshadowed that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I kind of wondered why he was in the Arctic, but I never really knew why. And that kind of explains why he was in the Arctic.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good symbol to end on.
Yeah.
If anyone else has anything like to bring up, like anything else you guys really want to talk about?
I think we're good. I think we hit the time cap too, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just ended, or we just finished.
All right, so that should wrap it up then.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god.
This has been the end of the seminar sequel.
This is the end of our saga. This is where it ends, guys. We won't ever have to do this ever again. These videos will permanently be on YouTube, and like 20 years from now, we're gonna like stumble across them and be like, oh my god, look at us in high school doing these crappy videos.
Just like look at that wall.
All thanks to Bartello.
Yeah. Hopefully we get some money off of this. Alright.
Bye, Bartello.
Goodbye, Bartello.
Love you.
Love you
I still have to
too.
turn in my books Monday, so it's not really bye.
Yeah, that too.
See you later.